Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready to level up your research game?
Always.
Today, we're taking a deep dive into something super practical. How to read a research paper efficiently. Like how to actually get the good stuff out of it without losing your whole day.
Yeah, we've all been there.
Yeah.
Staring at a wall of text, feeling completely lost.
Right. So for this deep dive, we're looking at a paper by Keshav from the University of Waterloo, and it's like a cheat code for researchers.
Hmm.
Honestly, this is useful even if you're not a hardcore academic. Anyone who has to stay up to date, prep for a presentation, or just loves learning new stuff, this is going to be a game changer.
It really is.
Okay, so one of the things the paper talks about is how much time researchers spend reading. It's a lot, but no one ever teaches us how to do it effectively.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? Like you just expect
Yeah.
to figure it out. Imagine the time we could all save if we knew the tricks.
Exactly. Which brings us to what Keshav calls the three-pass approach. Basically, it's a more strategic way to read papers.
And the best part is, it's super adaptable. Sometimes you need that deep, deep dive into a paper. Other times you just want to know if it's even relevant to you. The 3 passes let you choose your level of engagement.
So walk us through these passes. Like, what's the first one all about?
The first pass is the 5-minute scan. It's all about reconnaissance.
Reconnaissance.
Yeah. You're trying to figure out, is this paper even worth my time?
Hmm.
Can I get what I need from it? And you can figure that out pretty quickly, like in a few minutes.
Okay, I like that. So how do I do this 5-minute scan? What am I actually doing?
First, you read the title, obviously. Then you read the abstract very carefully, then the introduction. After that, you just skim the section headings so you get a sense of the structure. What are they trying to argue?
But aren't I missing all the important details underneath those headings?
For now, yeah. You're just getting the big picture. Then glance at the math, if there is any, and go straight to the conclusion.
Right, right. Okay, so title, abstract, intro, skim the headings, look at the conclusion. Anything else I should look at in this first pass?
You should definitely look at the references. See if there are any names that jump out at you, papers you recognize. That can give you a sense of how this paper fits into the bigger picture.
Ah, I see. And speaking of fitting into the bigger picture, if you're the one writing a paper, this is really important.
Totally. Most readers only do this first pass.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah. So if you want people to actually read your work, you've got to hook them immediately.
Makes sense. So what should we be looking for in that first 5 minutes?
Keshav talks about 5 C's: category, context, correctness, contributions, and clarity.
Break those down a little bit for me.
Sure. Category is simple. What kind of paper is it? Is it theoretical? Experimental? Is it a review? Then context, where does it fit into the existing research?
Okay, got it.
Correctness means, are the assumptions they're making sound? Do the methods seem okay? That you have contributions, what's new here, what are the big takeaways? And lastly, clarity. Is the paper well written, easy to understand?
So if a paper fails on any of those C's in those first 5 minutes,
It's probably going to get skipped. Sad but true.
so having a really strong abstract and a clear structure is crucial.
Yep, absolutely crucial.
Yeah.
Think of it as your paper's elevator pitch. You got to get people excited in those first few seconds.
Love that. So let's say a paper passes this initial test. We think it might be interesting. It's in our area. Now we're ready to invest a little bit more time.
Exactly. That's where pass 2 comes in.
All right, bring on pass 2. What's the strategy here?
Now we're going a little bit deeper, but we're still not getting lost in the weeds. We want to understand the key arguments, but we don't need to sweat every little detail just yet.
So how do we avoid getting bogged down in the details while still, like, actually understanding the paper?
This is where active reading comes in.
Active reading, you mean like not just zoning out while staring at the words?
Pretty much. You actually have to engage with the material. Jot down notes as you go. Maybe try to summarize the argument in your own words. Highlight key terms, anything you need to come back to.
Got it. So I'm taking notes, summarizing, really trying to process the information. Anything else that's important in this second pass?
Well, Keshav says to pay special attention to the figures and diagrams. Don't just glance at them, really look at them. Ask yourself, are the axes labeled correctly? Are there error bars? Do the visuals make sense?
I can see how that's important, but why does it matter so much?
Remember those 5 C's from the first pass? Well, looking closely at the figures can sometimes reveal problems with the paper's correctness or clarity.
That makes sense. It's like we're little research detectives looking for clues.
That's a great way to put it. And while you're at it, make note of any references that seem interesting. Maybe there's a paper they cite that you want to check out or a method they mention that you want to learn more about.
So it's like building a research rabbit hole, but in a good way.
Exactly. You're expanding your knowledge, making connections. And just a quick tip, don't just scribble these references down on a napkin. Use a reference manager, or at least a spreadsheet or something. Trust me, it will save you so much headache later on.
Great advice. Organization is key, especially when we're dealing with a mountain of research.
Absolutely.
So by the end of pass two, I've spent maybe an hour or so with the paper. I've got a solid grasp on the main arguments, and I'm starting to think critically about the research itself.
Yep, that's the idea. And for a lot of papers, that might be all you need. You got
Yeah.
the gist, now you can move on to the next one. But for those papers that are really, really important to your work, maybe you're even reviewing it for a journal.
Okay, what happens then?
Then it's time for the deepest of the deep dives. It's time for pass 3.
Ooh, can't wait to hear about this one. Pass three. This is where we really get into the weeds, huh?
Yeah, this is like the ultimate level of engagement. It's like you're not just reading the paper anymore. You're trying to really understand it inside and out, almost like you were a co-author.
Wow, a co-author. So what kind of things are we looking for here?
Well, you're looking for those hitter assumptions, like things the authors might not even realize there. They're assuming you're looking for missing citations.
Mm-hmm.
Any gaps in the logic, anything that could affect how we interpret the research.
Okay, so it's not just about understanding what the authors did, but also thinking about what they didn't do.
Exactly. And this process of like virtually re-implementing the paper can actually make you a better researcher
Really? How so?
because you're thinking through the methodology, you're thinking about the analysis, you're basically practicing those skills in your head.
Oh, that's interesting. Like I'm shadowing the researchers, seeing how they approach the problem.
Yep, exactly. And the more you do this, the more comfortable you'll get with it. You'll find you can almost reconstruct the paper from memory. You can pinpoint the core arguments, and you might even start generating your own research questions.
That makes sense. So these three passes, they're amazing for individual papers, but what about when we're faced with like a mountain of research? Like, what if I need to do a literature survey for a new project or for my thesis? Where do I even start?
Yeah, it can be super overwhelming. But honestly, the three-pass approach can help you break it down into smaller pieces. It's like, when you're putting together a puzzle, you start with a few key pieces and you kind of work outwards from there.
Okay, I like that analogy. So where do I find those key pieces when I'm starting out in a new field?
Well, a good place to start is an academic search engine like Google Scholar. Just type in some keywords related to your topic and look for highly cited papers that have been published recently.
So I'm not just grabbing any random paper. I'm looking for the ones that have already made an impact.
Right, exactly. These are like the foundational papers, the ones that everyone else is building on.
Got it. And then I just apply the three-pass method to these key papers.
You got it. A quick first pass will give you a sense of the big picture, what are the main arguments. But here's a trick. Pay really close attention to the related work section.
Ah, I see. The related work section is like a treasure map.
Exactly. It can point you to other important papers, other key researchers in the field, and sometimes you get lucky and they'll even point you to a review paper or a survey paper.
Ooh, a survey paper. That would be amazing. It's like having an expert walk you through the whole field.
Right. But even if you don't find a survey paper right away, you can kind of create your own mini survey by tracing citations. Like, look at the bibliographies of those key papers and
Yeah.
see if any citations are shared across multiple papers.
So I'm looking for patterns like the same authors popping up over and over again.
Yep, exactly. Those are likely to be the big names in the field of foundational works. It's like building a family tree of research. Oh, and another tip, once you've identified some key researchers, check out their websites. See where they've published recently.
Because that'll help me figure out what the top conferences and journals are in the field, right?
Yep. It's like finding out where the best conversations are happening, and then you can go to those conference websites or the journal archives and browse the recent proceedings or the recent issues.
So by combining those highly cited papers with the stuff I'm finding in those conference proceedings, I'm starting to build a pretty solid foundation for my literature survey.
Exactly. And as you're going through all these papers, remember to keep using the three-pass method. It's not just about reading more, it's about reading smarter.
I love that. All this talk about efficient reading is making me want to grab a stack of papers and put these techniques into practice. But before we wrap up, I'd love to hear from our listeners.
Yeah, let's open up the conversation.
How have you adapted the three-pass approach to fit your own workflow or your learning style? Maybe you have a special way of taking notes, or maybe you have like a time limit for each pass.
We want to hear all your tips and tricks. Share them in the comments below because honestly, the best way to learn is to learn from each other.
Absolutely. Learning from each other is key, especially when it comes to something as important as reading research papers. But before we go, I have one final thought for everyone listening. Think about this. We've been talking about how to read papers like a researcher, but what if we could use these skills in other areas of our lives?
Ooh, that's interesting. I've never thought about it like that. What do you mean?
Well, take news articles, for example. We're constantly bombarded with information from all sorts of sources, and it can be hard to tell what's real and what's not.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Yeah.
We could use the three-pass method to quickly figure out if an article is even credible.
Exactly. Pass one, the 5-minute scan, could help us determine the source's reliability,
Yeah.
the author's perspective, and, the overall quality of the reporting.
And then in pass two, we could dig a little deeper into the evidence. Are there any facts or data to back up the claims? Are there any biases or logical fallacies?
And if the article is really important or controversial, we could even do a pass three where we fact check everything, consult alternative sources, and really challenge our own assumptions.
That's such a powerful way to think about it. It's not just about reading research papers, it's about becoming a more critical thinker, a more discerning consumer of information.
Right. These skills are essential in a world where we're constantly being bombarded with information from all directions.
Mm.
It's like having a mental toolkit for navigating the information landscape.
And it's something we can all continue to develop and refine over time. The more we practice, the better we'll get at quickly assessing the value and the credibility of the information we encounter.
Absolutely. It's all about being mindful and intentional with the information we consume.
Well said. I think that's a great place to wrap up our deep dive for today.
I agree. So, just to recap, we've explored the three-pass method for efficient paper reading, and we've talked about how to apply those skills to everything from literature surveys to reading the news. Remember, it's not just about reading more, it's about reading smarter. And most importantly, it's about staying curious, asking questions, and never stopping learning.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive. Happy reading.
So, we've been talking about reading papers like a researcher, but what if we could use these skills in other parts of our lives?
Hmm, that's an interesting thought. What do you have in mind?
Well, think about news articles. We're always getting hit with information from everywhere, right? It can be hard to know what to trust.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So you're thinking we could use the three-pass method to, like, quickly figure out if an article is even worth our time.
Exactly. That first pass, the 5-minute scan, that could help us figure out if the source is reliable, see what the author's perspective is, get a feel for the quality of the reporting.
And then with the second pass, we could, look a little closer. Is there any real evidence? Are there facts or data? And are there any biases or, like, gaps in the logic?
Right. And if it's a really important article, something kind of controversial, maybe we could even do that third pass.
Yeah.
Fact check everything, look for other sources, and really, challenge our own assumptions.
Wow, that's a really cool way to think about it. It's not just about research papers then, it's about, like, becoming a more critical thinker in general.
Totally. And I think these skills are so important now, We're just flooded with information all the time. It's like having a mental toolkit to help you figure out what's real and what's not.
Yeah, I love that. And it's something we can keep working on. The more we practice this, the better we get at figuring out, is this information valuable? Is it credible? Can I trust it?
Absolutely. It's all about being mindful, being intentional with the information we let into our brains.
Couldn't have said it better myself. I think that's a perfect note to end on, don't you?
Yeah, I think so too. So to wrap up our deep dive today, we talked about Keshav's three-pass method for reading papers efficiently, and we even talked about how to use those same skills for things like reading the news. Remember,
Yeah.
it's not just about reading more, it's about reading smarter. And more than anything, stay curious, ask questions, never stop learning.
Thanks for joining us, everyone, and happy reading.